The International Monetary Fund said today that the U.S. dollar is overvalued by 6 to 12%. That analysis was part of the organization's annual assessment of the currencies and deficits of major economies. As you know, President Trump has often said that dollar strength is hurting our economy by slowing U.S. exports.
In fact, Dan Riccardo joins us now to talk more about what a strong dollar means for the economy and for you. He is president of Quaker Wealth Management. Dan, welcome to NBR tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Bill, Raquel, how are you? Rahel, hi, Bill.
You know, for years, Treasury secretaries have said that a strong dollar is in the best interest of the U.S. economy. But now there's a lot of hand-wringing about that. Is it the case still or not?
It depends on whose interest you're talking about. So from a consumer perspective, a strong dollar is terrific. It's like getting a pay raise without getting any more money in your paycheck, because when you and I and Rahel go to a store and buy imported goods, they're a lot cheaper, right? So for you and I as consumers, at least in the short term, a strong dollar is a good thing. And it also throughout the economy ripples through and lowers the overall pressure on inflation. Again, we would think that's a good thing, at least in the short term.
Right.
And finally, grab your passport, go on sale, because, you know, Europe's on sale. It's a great time to be a tourist with a strong dollar, right? Because your dollar goes further in overseas markets.
Dan, what about for corporations? So we've already heard from a number of companies this earnings season point to the strong U.S. dollar, how it's hurting their earnings. How does this impact companies?
Yeah, bingo. So for every winner, maybe there's a loser. And in this case, when we talk about companies, the reality is that most of our companies now are multinational, global companies like Nike, for example, where they get a big percentage of their sales from overseas consumers, overseas customers. Well, guess what? If the dollar is stronger, that means those overseas consumers are probably going to buy less of those products. And even if they buy the same amount of those products, when we convert it back to dollars, those companies will feel it in the bottom line because they're getting less dollars for that product.
And many times now, with the dollar doing what it's doing and other currencies around the world, companies have to make the decision. Do we make things here in the U.S. or do we make them overseas where it might be cheaper? But now you've got these tariffs to deal with as well.
Exactly. So it doesn't make a CFO's job any easier, Bill, right? So this stuff is complicated, but we always like to think of it in the short term and the long term. The short term, a strong dollar certainly benefits a lot of Americans. There's no doubt about it. In the long term, though, it does make our businesses somewhat less competitive. And in fact, one could argue we might lose jobs in the long term, right? Because as those jobs move overseas or, U.S. factories shut down, clearly that's not a good thing. So in the long term, what could be a virtuous cycle in the beginning becomes a vicious cycle later on.
Dan Riccardo with Quaker Wealth Management. Good stuff on the strong dollar. Thanks for joining us tonight.
You got it, guys. Thanks. Have a good night.
And the consumer helps results at Bank of America, and that's where we begin tonight's Market Focus. The bank reported better than expected earnings and revenue thanks to a stronger retail banking performance. But the company's net interest income fell slightly below Wall Street's expectations as B of A sees a possible hit from rate cuts by the Federal Reserve. Shares were up a fraction to $29.19. Amazon is facing an investigation by the European Commission into the company's dealings with third-party merchants. The commission plans to look at whether Amazon is breaking antitrust rules by abusing its power as both an independent seller and retailer of its own products. Separately, Amazon says this year's Prime Days exceeded last year's Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales combined, selling more than 175 million items. Shares were down a fraction to $1,992.03. PNC Financial beat estimates thanks to a rise in interest income and loans. The regional lender saw its loan portfolio increase more than 6% in the quarter, led by commercial lending. The stock was up a fraction to $139.68.
Strong borrowing also helped U.S. Bancorp's results top expectations. Residential mortgage and credit card loans were key in those categories. Stock rose more than 2% as a result to $54.22 today. Microsoft is partnering with AT&T in a multi-year cloud deal reportedly worth more than $2 billion. AT&T will now use Microsoft's Azure cloud system as well as a Microsoft 365 package that includes Windows 10 and Office applications. Software that both companies will also collaborate on future 5G products. Both Microsoft and AT&T shares were down a fraction in today's trade. Then after the bell, eBay posted better than expected earnings, but its gross margin merchandise volume fell. The company did, however, raise guidance for down the road. Shares initially rose in after-hours trading tonight, but they did close the regular session down more than 2% to 39.03.
A stifling heat wave is taking shape across large portions of the country, from the plains to New England. Nearly 90% of the population could see temperatures of at least 90 degrees at some point over the next week. Several cities, including Chicago, Detroit, New York, and Washington, D.C., could see the highest temperatures of the summer. And joining us now to discuss the economic impact is Paul Walsh. He is Global Director of Weather Strategy with IBM Services. Paul, thanks so much for being with us.
Hey there, guys.
So when do we start to see the economic impact of this stifling heat?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, because we actually start to see the impact of the heat before the heat gets here. Part of the reason is because the weather forecasts are getting really, really good, and most of us are walking around with a mobile phone, so we are all expecting it. So people are already planning for this heat. Of course, by the time we get into the weekend, it's already hot now, frankly, but by the time we get to this weekend, it's going to be we're going to be seeing the hottest temperatures we've seen in several years in the big cities in the Northeast. So there's going to be a very, very significant impact. But it's not going to be as big of an impact as it could be if it lasted longer than what we're currently expecting.
Give us an example. I mean, people who work outside, they might not be out there for long, or, you know, other areas where the heat might impact various companies.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the heat is going to impact everything that happens outdoors. So whether it's people going golfing, maybe not going golfing as much, outdoor entertainment venues, people are going to be staying in. So it's going to have an impact in terms of where people are going, and it's going to have an impact on what kind of things they're going to be buying. So this is a broader sort of an economic impact. And of course, people working outdoors, there's health impacts. You know, the impact of heat waves is actually one of the biggest killers out there, much more so than things like hurricanes and tornadoes. If you have long-lasting heat waves, the economic impact, the health impact can be really, really significant. So we're fortunate, at least in this instance, that it's not going to be a very long duration event.
And Paul, honing in more specifically on the Midwest, you know, it seems not too long ago we were talking about record flooding in the Midwest and how that impacted crops. What does heat like this do to that area and the crops?
Well, you know, I think there's a little bit of a silver lining here as it relates to this specific event. Of course, we're seeing crop conditions now that are the worst that we've seen since 2012 because of that rain, because of the impact on field work. This kind of weather, if it lasted for a long time, just like the other impacts I talked about, could be very bad. But in this case, it's going to help to dry out some of those fields. So the warming of the heat that we're going to see is going to help, I think, contribute to catching up or helping the crops catch up to getting to harvest. Is
there a time of year? I mean, we expect heat this time of year, you know, so retailers have to plan for that. Other companies, the shipping companies have to plan for things like that. But when it gets this hot, is there a way you can plan ahead so that you can minimize some of the economic impact that would otherwise occur?
Yeah, more and more businesses, retailers, consumer packaged goods companies, et cetera, are using weather information, using analytics, using AI to be able to better anticipate exactly what the impact is going to be on consumers and demand, and then using those insights, those proactive insights, to make sure that they have enough of the right products, for example, in the stores to meet the demand that's going to be caused, not too much of the kind of products that will not be selling because of this kind of an event. And just in general, leveraging technology across the board to be better prepared to help people better deal with this. So it's both consumers, retail, as well as government. And it's really a function of our ability to better leverage data and analytics to be able to anticipate these events.
Okay, Paul Walsh with IBM Services. We certainly do appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
And coming up, how technology is reshaping the fast food industry and driving sales in the process.
It reported yesterday that Domino's Pizza is getting squeezed by an increase in competition from delivery services like Uber Eats and Grubhub. As many fast food chains focus on delivery, they're also going high tech to increase sales. The strategy revolves around a kiosk. Kate Rogers explains.
The technological makeovers restaurants around the globe are getting these days almost always involve kiosks that allow customers to personalize orders and place them quickly. The upgrades can be seen in restaurants from McDonald's to Panera and Taco Bell, and new data suggests they're working. Tilster, a digital ordering solutions and analytics firm, teamed up with research firm SSI and asked 2,000 consumers to gauge their takes on kiosk technology. Overall usage is up 6% in the last 12 months, with more than a third of customers saying they've used a kiosk in the past year. And 30% say they prefer them over cashiers if line lengths are equal. The tech is resonating with customers across age demographics.
It's simpler to do that than to talk and try to communicate with another person, as weird as that sounds.
I think it's more convenient.
Self-serve kiosks can be costly to install, anywhere from $1,000 to $20,000 up front, along with several $100s per month in fees. But analysts say the investment can be well worth it.
When customers have a little bit more time and have a full chance to go through the menu, you typically see between a 5 and 10% increase to the average transaction size with kiosks.
Turnover is also notoriously high in the restaurant industry, and the labor market is historically tight. While kiosks aren't necessarily a replacement for workers, they may free them up to better serve customers.
The other thing with so many orders taking place digitally now, it's a great way to communicate with your consumers directly at the point of sale, which is something that really retailers and restaurants haven't had the opportunity to do before.
But some say they miss the good old days of just talking face to face and do worry about kiosks eventually replacing workers.
I would prefer to use the one that would create the most jobs. So if it's a person, I'd rather have a person versus the person not being there versus the touchscreen.
You kind of have that like more personal one-to-one interaction, and I think it's just nice every now and again to like talk to someone.
For Nightly Business Report, I'm Kate Rogers.
And finally tonight, the Washington Monument is taking on a whole new look to mark the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon mission. A life-size projection of the Saturn V rocket is being mapped against the monument. The Saturn V was the tallest and most powerful rocket ever built. It carried the Apollo 11 crew to the moon back in 1969.
What a sight that is.
Indeed.
And that is Nightly Business Report for tonight. I'm Rahel Solomon. Thanks for watching.
I'm Bill Griffith. Have a great evening. We'll see you tomorrow.